podcast where we share conversation tips, vocabulary lessons, and stories with teachers and students from around the world who have really changed their lives because of this English language. I am your host and Canadian teacher, Jasmine. This week, we have Luis Torres joining us on the podcast, where he will share his story about leaving Mexico to go study English in America for 1 year, which turned into something much, much bigger. Luis was born and raised in Mexico when his parents decided to send him to the US for 1 year during his high school experience in order to improve his English. He actually ended up staying for 3 whole years to finish his high school degree. Luis has now been an English teacher for 3 years and has helped students from various countries in Latin America and Europe to improve their confidence and fluency in the English language. He's a huge traveler, having been to over 77 countries and 200 cities around the world. I truly believe his own journey with the English language can inspire anyone who is listening to follow their own dreams, because it really is possible when you put in the work. So this is what this whole series is about. We'd like to show you real people with real success stories involving the English language to inspire you to take the next steps in starting your own journey. Now, enough about me and enough talking. Let's get into the episode. Hi there, Luis. Thanks for joining us this week on the English Journey podcast. How are you?
Hi, Jasmine. I'm doing good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm great. What city are you in right now?
I am actually, it's called León. It's right in the center of Mexico.
Nice. Does it feel kind of strange to not be able to travel now?
Yes and no. I mean, I've been used to traveling for so long that actually being at home for now, it's actually quite pleasant.
I totally agree with that. Same with me. I do travel a lot, but this summer kind of forced me to slow down in some ways, and I feel like that was a blessing in disguise.
Exactly.
So we're really excited to hear your story. I know I did say quite a lot in the intro, but why don't you just start off by telling our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Okay, well, thank you everyone who's listening, and I really appreciate and value everybody's time, because I know that is one thing that we cannot get back. So I'm really, really hoping that with my story, you are inspired to go after whatever it is that you want to accomplish. Uh, Besides, the things that you mentioned, I don't really like to talk about myself in terms of what I am or what I've done. I want people to know that I'm just a regular guy, and the only difference is that I was very determined, and I knew from the beginning that I wanted to travel. I had no idea how I was going to go about it, but I just knew that I wanted to travel, I wanted to see the world, and I wasn't going to stop until I sort of accomplished that dream. So that took about 10 years in total. So it doesn't happen overnight. That's probably the first thing that I want to share with people. If you really want to go after something big, you have to be very, very, very patient. And some things that I enjoy doing is I like jogging, I like cooking, I like to read. I try to read pretty much every day.
Great skill.
Yes, of course. Traveling, without a doubt, I would say that's probably an obsession. And besides that, I would say that's pretty much it. I'm pretty laid back. I try to live a simple life, and yeah, so that's pretty much it.
Nice. So let's get into a bit your whole beginning of the English journey, where you were basically 14, which is super young. So how did you feel when your parents told you that you were basically going to move to America and study English?
Jasmine, the actual story is that I have an older brother. He's 2 years older than me. So when he was about to finish middle school, my dad told him that he was going to send him for a year to California. We have relatives in California. And at the beginning of that last year of middle school, my brother was like, yeah, sure. So by the time that year went through, he chose not to go for, whatever reason. To be honest, I've never asked him. And at the time, I remember asking my dad, I remember having a conversation with him. And I told him that if by the time I finished middle school, if he could still afford to send me to America for a year, that I was more than willing to do it. But at the time I was like 12 or 13 years old, so he probably looked at me and was like, yeah, whatever. Yeah. So after 2 years, I continued asking my dad, and then I was I was really trying to sort of learn at the private school that I was going to. But I was younger, and I wasn't always the best student, but I tried. So when the time came, he actually asked me, and he said, "Okay, so if you're serious about going, the day you finish middle school, you're actually flying to California the next day. So there's not going to be no graduation party or anything. You're flying the next day." And I was like, "Okay, sure, I have no problem with that." So that's what happened.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that's sort of like the beginning of the story.
So you weren't kidding. You really were determined, even from such a young age.
Yes, yes.
You knew what you wanted, which is cool. So, what were those 3 years? How did that even happen? How did it end up being 3 years? And tell us a bit about your experience being a high school student in America.
The first year was really, really amazing because I was living in Anaheim, California, and I'm not sure if you've been there, but it's quite it's a very beautiful city. I would say it's small in comparison to other cities in California, but it's super beautiful. The weather is amazing. I think during the winter, the weather comes down to like in Fahrenheit, it's about like 70 degrees, which is is pretty much nothing.
Wow. Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, so weather wise, it was amazing, and for me, the biggest impression that I got was the amount of students from different countries that were attending the same school.
Oh,
I couldn't tell you like from how many different nationalities the student body consisted, but I remember having was seeing students from like South Korea, from the Vietnam, from the Philippines, obviously Americans, a few Brazilians, and students from various countries in Latin America. So to me, that was a huge shock, but in a good way, because I knew that I wasn't the only one trying to fit in, sort of.
yeah, it definitely helps when there's others going through the same thing as you.
Yes, exactly. So anyway, so the first 6 months, I would say, the first semester was a bit difficult because even though I understood some English, of course, I wasn't totally prepared to have 100% classes in English.
Right.
So I really had to sort of push myself. And then when the beginning of the second semester started, I decided to join the football team, the American football team, even though I had never played, even though I'd never played football before. But the season was over, so they were starting to train for the following year. So I said, well, why not? I'll give it a try. So I started training with the guys, and for me, that's probably, I would say, that's one of the fondest memory of that first year.
So, did you feel like that football team gave you a sense of community that maybe you didn't have in the United States?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Even though I had quite a
Hmm.
few number of relatives there, just having those students or those, to be honest, I wouldn't really call them my friends, but just sharing those moments with the guys, and them knowing that I wasn't completely fluent in English, they just sort of welcomed me. So that was a huge surprise for me.
That's awesome. And also, I'm sure that that whole experience made you appreciate the culture a little bit more because it's one thing to learn English in the classroom, but you were really out there in the authentic world, learning through laughs and jokes and playing sports.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
That's cool. So, how do you think, in your opinion, which is kind of a big question, but how do you feel like the language itself, English, really changed how you're living your life now?
I would say that it just completely changed it. Because obviously at the time I knew that I wanted to learn English because I wanted to travel, but I had no idea how I was going to go about it. So anyway, so just going back a bit to that story, that first year turned into three, and the reason was that I was just so happy to be there that I told my dad that I wasn't going back. But of course, it wasn't like I was making my own decisions. I still needed his approval. So at the end of that first year, he went back to California. Well, he flew to California. We had a conversation, and he said, "Okay, well, if you want to stay, then let's go back to Mexico because you have to speak to your mother, and then if she approves, then I'll send you back for another year." So I came back to Mexico, I spoke to my mom, and I eventually flew back. But this time I flew back to Colorado. So I ended up finishing high school there, and that experience was completely different. It was completely different in some good ways and in some bad ways. And I mentioned this because that that particular experience, it really sort of helped me more in a sort of like a psychological way.
Hmm.
You know, have you ever seen those movies that are based in like these high schools where you have the, you know, the football players and you have the cheerleaders and you have the, you know, the cowboys and you have this and that.
Yep, the cliche movie type of scenario. Yeah.
Exactly. That's the way the high school that I attended in Colorado was, and the one that I had attended in California wasn't like that. So when I initially started my second year, I felt completely isolated. You know, because I think in total we were about maybe at the most 15 foreign students,
Mm.
whereas in California there were probably hundreds of us.
Yeah.
You know, so my English wasn't as good. It was better, but it wasn't fluent enough for me to actually have the courage to mingle with people. So the first year was very challenging, but you know, the end of that second year, I told myself, I was like, well, you're pretty much here to learn English. You're not really doing it, you know. So I kind of like forced myself to come out of my shell on my last year, and that really started my path towards, okay, so yeah, now I'm getting better. So what can I do if I improve, if I really improve the knowledge of the English language?
Hmm. Hey, better late than never, right?
Exactly.
So wait, what was the reason why you didn't go back to California? Why did you have to go to Colorado?
Well, you know, to be honest, it wasn't up to me. It was up to my dad. And when
Mm.
by the time I graduated high school, I had a conversation with my dad, and I asked him. I said, "Dad, you know, I just need to ask you why you decided to send me to Colorado and not to keep me in California." And you know, he was very honest, and he said that he was afraid that I would maybe like join a gang or start doing drugs or whatever. And what I told him next, it really shocked him because I was like, "Well, Dad, you know, I have to tell you something, and this is probably gonna shock you, and I'm not sure if you're going to believe me, but the whole year that I was in California, you know, I was never offered a can of beer or a little bit of weed or any other type of drug. And when I started my second year in Colorado, the very first day of school, I was offered marijuana. You know, so I was so when I
Yep.
told my dad when I said that to my dad, you know, his face just went just completely just white, and I was like, yeah, you know, that's pretty much what happened. Obviously, you know, later on I did try it. I'm not going to say that I didn't, but that's the reason why I ended up going to Colorado and not to California.
Okay, well, see, you can't really plan for everything, so sometimes the unexpected things happen and you just have to roll with it.
Yeah, life happens.
So, okay, you went to school to study English. Now, what about those who are trying to learn English, but maybe they're not sure if they want to study in a professional setting in a classroom? Do you feel like you need to go study in a school or a classroom?
I would say that in today's world, that's not really necessary. You know, maybe if you had asked me this question perhaps maybe 10 years ago, I would say yes. But in today's world, I don't think that's really needed, you know. And the reason why I say that is that I honestly think that we, not only as teachers, but also as students of life, sometimes we get caught up in like focusing on obtaining a diploma or a certificate or just something that will tell the people that surround us, hey, look what I've accomplished. And that's not, at least in my experience, that's not, that hasn't been necessary. You know, there's so many different resources nowadays, obviously, you
Mm-hmm.
know, with internet and podcasts and YouTube and there's just so many platforms that if you if you really want to learn, it doesn't matter if you want to learn English, you know, if you want to learn how to paint, if you want to learn about carpentry, there are endless there is an endless amount of resources that they're just there. You know, you just have to commit.
No, it's so true. And like you mentioned, I don't think that 10 years ago it was the same case. And so things have really, really accelerated and it's changed for the better. And I do think that nowadays there isn't really an excuse. So you can't really say, like, oh, I don't have the money or I don't have a school that will accept me. I think you can really put yourself out there and basically go for what you want.
Exactly, and I would just add just something quite small to that. In my experience, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I've had a ton of jobs, like a range of completely different jobs. But if we were to focus on like my professional experience, that is based on customer service. Yeah, I worked for years in the cruise ship industry, and I work for a total of four different companies, which for some people that's like when they would see my CV, they would be like, well, it just seems like you can't commit to one company. But I would just explain that my ambitions were bigger, you know.
Mhm.
And the reason why I mentioned it is that because during the interviews, no one ever asked me, well, what sort of like English diploma do you have? Or where did you learn your English? No one ever asked me that question. So,
It's interesting.
yeah.
And you know what? I do think that's a good thing. I don't see that as a bad thing to go and try a bunch of different experiences, whether that's in jobs or just in your personal life, because I'm sure those different jobs, you learned a different thing or a couple different things from each experience.
Yes, definitely. I work for a British company. I believe it was my third company. And when I talk about that experience, I tell people that that's where I did my PhD in customer service. It was such an incredible experience because the ship itself, it was horrible. It was completely horrible. The beds were single beds. They were old. It was really really bad. But the one thing that particular ship had, it was service. Everybody was so kind. Everybody was just so ready to serve, but in a good way, in an honest way. That the ratings were always above 90%, which is something that you don't really see in the cruise ship industry. And that experience eventually led me to work for a luxury cruise line.
And so, with customer service, as that is a very oral, communication, speaking type of job, do you feel like by learning English, it opened up a complete amount of opportunities for you?
Definitely, yes. And also, because I ended up spending not, I didn't spend like 8 years in a row in the US, but, I spent 3 years and then I went back to Mexico and then I would go back to the US. So in total, I spent about 8 years in the US. So, I sort of like, I became quite conscious of the culture, not only of the culture in Colorado, but like the culture in California, the culture in New York, in Boston, different areas.
The American culture.
Exactly. So when it was time for me to work in the cruise ship industry, I sort of, I could actually relate to people when I was dealing with them. So, for example, if a guest came up to me and if he or she was wearing a particular jersey, let's say for a hockey team or a basketball team or whatever, I would just start a conversation based on that.
Hmm.
So that really, really, really helped me.
So, you kind of added the human aspect to customer service through your tool, which was language.
Yes, yes. And I would say, I mean, I'm not sure, what your experience as a teacher has been like, but I would say that people actually connect with you on a deeper level when you're just honest and open,
100%.
you know?
Yes. Yeah. Just being your true self, expressing yourself, talking about goals, and, just getting beyond the formal education, as you mentioned, and just really becoming raw and real.
Yeah, exactly. And if any of our listeners happen to be in a situation where, let's say for example, they have a particular job and they don't know how to do it, well, it's okay to say it, because if you say it, you're actually opening up yourself to a range of possibilities. At least that's the way it's been for me.
So, okay, you're a big traveler. So, what about those who really love to travel, but they're kind of scared to go to a new country where they're not speaking the native tongue there? So, do you have any advice since you have been around the world? What can we say to those who are really wanting to get out there and do their thing, but they're still nervous about speaking the country's language?
That's a very good question, Jasmine. And again, if you had asked me this question 10 years ago, my answer probably would have been totally different. Because I think that, especially with the use of social media, I think traveling has changed. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if it has changed for the good or for the bad. If you ask me, I would
It's
probably
tough to say.
exactly, because the majority of people that travel nowadays, of course, not everyone, but most people that travel, they just want to do it because they want to go to a particular spot, take a picture, post it, and then that's it. Go to the next spot, take another picture, post it, and carry on. And in my experience, that's not traveling. So, but going back to your question, I would say that, for those listeners that really want to travel and that, if they really want to immerse themselves in the culture, I would say, just plan your trip, carefully. I would say give yourself at least 10 days in that particular place, you know. For example, let's say you want to go to Italy. There is so much to see in Italy
Mm-hmm.
that you could probably spend a lifetime there. But most people when they choose to go to Italy, they spend a few days in Rome, they spend a few days in Venice, or they go to Florence, or they go to whatever other place. But if you were to, for example, say, okay, well, I'm going to spend an entire week in Rome, and I'm going to try to do things that tourists don't do, I can guarantee you that your experience would be totally different. But you
Mm.
have to be open to the idea. You have to be open sort of to the critics once you go home. If they tell you, hey, for example, did you go to La Fontana de Trevi?
Mm-hmm.
If you say, actually, no, I didn't, I chose not to go, of course you're going to be criticized for that.
Right.
But if you tell them that, you found this tiny dark alley and there was a lady there selling lasagna, and then you went and you ate with her, and you sort of managed to have a conversation, that's something that not many people can tell.
Wow, yeah, that's really interesting advice. So basically, not being afraid to do the unconventional things. Don't just copy what everyone else is doing. Try to be different, be unique, and that's where you're going to have the most growth and the most unique opportunities.
Yes, because I mean, ultimately, at least again in my experience, that's what traveling is. Like, of course, you could go to any. I mean, in today's world, you could go to pretty much any other country, and you could eat at McDonald's, or you could eat at KFC, or whatever other
Mm-hmm.
fast food chain. But again, that's not traveling. So if you want to have a proper experience, you know, try. I know it's difficult, but try not to use your phone. I mean, of course, you can use it to take pictures if that's a camera you use, but using Google Maps or whatever app to find your way around. No, I mean, get lost. Don't be afraid of just going on a crazy walk and just see where you end up. Obviously, you have to be careful.
Yeah, be
you have
safe
to,
still.
yeah, be safe. But sometimes again in my experience, that's how I stumble upon some of the nicest restaurants or some of the nicest bars that I've been to. So
No, I do agree with that. I think that's really inspiring advice. And so, thank you so much, Louise. I hope this episode inspired you listeners to at least consider the possibility of trying something new or just trying a different way to improve your English language skills that are not involving the traditional classroom. So, if you are looking to connect with Louise, I will have his website and his Instagram down below in the episode description box.
yes, yes, please.
Thank you so, so much for listening to our podcast. It means so much to see that we've been able to help some of you develop new positive routines that actually improve your English. I do always say this, but seeing you guys love the episodes motivates us to continue making great ones. So please let me know on Instagram if there's some topic that you'd really like me to speak about or to have a guest come and speak about. Our Instagram is at Glish Social, and we are always responding to our DMs, so definitely feel free to chat with us over there if you have a request. We also have an Instagram page just specifically for this podcast. So if you're ever curious to see, the faces behind who are speaking or how our guests look that we have on the show, I know I like to see that when I'm listening to a podcast. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely head over to our podcast Instagram, which is at English Journey Podcast. Thanks again for listening, and definitely come back next week for a new episode. Later.